Imagine a world plunged into chaos by internecine political conflict, religious warfare, economic turmoil, and political unrest. Imagine a region that, despite having many similarities culturally, had vast rifts that also existed, making peace a temporary, if only temporary, solution. Imagine a world plunged into constant military strife and turnover of leaders, and you have a place called the Holy Roman Empire. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Desks and Dorks. I'm Kyle, I'm the Dork. Today, we are talking about societies that would make for interesting tabletop role-playing game settings, and we get to talk about one of my all-time favorites, the Holy Roman Empire. Before we get started, a couple of things. If you would like to support us, the best ways to do so are joining our Patreon, where for $3 a month you get your name in the credits, and for $10 a month you get all of that stuff, plus early access to our content and a unique RPG once a month that you can't buy anywhere else, that we make special just for you, because we love you, and also because you pay us $10 a month. If you want our games, After the Rain, You Have Always Lived in the Lighthouse, Becoming Banana Bread, any of the amazing RPGs that we make, you can get those over at itch.io by following that QR code or links in the description below. And if you want physical copies, you can get them from Tabletop Bookshelf, Indie Press Revolution, or Exalted Funeral. With that out of the way, what are we going to discuss? First off, it's going to be kind of a primer on what the Holy Roman Empire was like. Imagine this as your sort of buffet to the world of Bohemia. This is not going to be one of those things where I'm going to go in depth on a lot of details. My goal is to give you a blush, a broad paint over of this society, so that you know if it's something that you want to delve deeper into, so that you can enjoy it for your tabletop games. We're going to be talking about why I think it is such a compelling setting, and believe me when I tell you, it is a really compelling setting, and of course, how we're going to use it in our games. As always, though, it's important for you all to remember that I focused on Western Europe in my studies as a medievalist, and the Holy Roman Empire did encompass parts of Eastern Europe. That means I'm going to be missing out on some of the cultural nuances that you might come to expect, and I feel it's important for me as a scholar to let you know that up front. Also, use some safety and communication tools when you're delving into some of the stuff with the Holy Roman Empire, because oh boy, is there a lot of violence, conflict, the destruction of citizens and property, and all manner of horrid chaos in the Holy Roman Empire. So again, just be good people, be kind to your players, make sure everyone feels okay and safe, and that's pretty much it. With that out of the way, let's talk the HRE. And in order for us to begin this discussion in earnest, we have to talk about what the Holy Roman Empire was. The Holy Roman Empire was a confederation of loosely organized states that composed much of what is now modern-day Germany and parts of Italy, Eastern Europe, and even extending into both the high north and the far south of France. It derives a lot of its earliest, shall we say, basis from the Frankish kingdoms of Charlemagne, but it has a lot of different cultural nuances. It draws on things like Slavic culture as well, Italian culture as well. It's why, for example, you have blonde hair, blue-eyed Italian folks in the northern part of Italy. Those are the descendants of people from the Holy Roman Empire, and again, that makes a huge difference. We talk quite often about cultural melting pots, much like they were in the Middle East in the time of the Crusades, or cultural salads where people mix together but they don't necessarily combine, kind of like the US. If anything, the Holy Roman Empire is kind of a cultural malt vinegar or salad dressing, where the cultures are all kind of in the same place, but just like when you have two solutions of different densities, they kind of filter out. And yes, they're in the same glass or the same jar, but there is a very clear dividing line between where some of them start and some of them end. And that's going to have some very interesting and very difficult consequences for our good pals in the HRE. All of this is to say, though, that this is wrapped up in an intensely militaristic religious zeal. There are two things that you can say when you're talking about the Holy Roman Empire. One, they cared quite a bit about religion. We'll get into that in a second, and they were certainly willing to fight for it. This means that you not only had government officials who were expected to battle, but you also had clergymen expected to fight as well. The Elector Counts of Warhammer and the Warrior Priests of Sigmar all draw their inspiration from individuals and military units within the Holy Roman Empire before the time of its collapse. And equally important is the cross-cultural issues that this place faces. Now, when we talk about the Holy Roman Empire, it is important for us to understand that for much of this region's history, it was plunged into economic, religious, and political civil war for a number of different reasons. Chief among them, however, is the issues between both Protestant and Catholic factions within the region. This was less common in the Middle Ages, when there was just good old-fashioned political and economic conflict drawn by the fact that princes, dukes, and those who had control of the regions of the Holy Roman Empire were constantly trying to expand their territories. But once we hit the Protestant Reformation, this place becomes a powder keg. It is a massive issue and is one of the biggest sources for both consternation and the eventual destruction of the Holy Roman Empire as a political and cultural unit. And finally, we have to talk warfare. I know I've mentioned it a bunch, and if it sounds like the Holy Roman Empire did a lot of fighting with everybody else and with itself, you would be right. In addition to listing these as the causes for warfare, warfare in general is something that will go on to define the Holy Roman Empire, its constituents, its leaders, and the countries and political entities that it interacts with forever. Seriously, this place is at war so much. It is unbelievable, and shockingly enough, again, yes, this is part of what makes it the inspiration for Warhammer. It is an entirely war-driven economy, political institution, and national cultural identity for much of its existence. I cannot stress this enough. Other than the Assyrians, I have a really hard time thinking of other cultures that have had to deal with this much fighting or have made it this much of a load-bearing personality trait to themselves than the Holy Roman Empire. But as important as it is for us to figure out what the Holy Roman Empire was, it's really important for us to discuss what it wasn't, because that also allows us as game masters and players to get a greater sense of what we're getting ourselves into. Let's start with what it wasn't, which the first one was holy. Look, let's be real here. They are religious, but holy means that everybody within this space can decide what that religion is, and for the, well, not the entirety of, but for the bulk of the Holy Roman Empire's existence, that's a huge freaking problem. You had entrenched Catholic monarchs and entrenched Catholic clergymen who were willing to fight for the Roman Catholic Church's authority. You also had intensely Protestant units who were willing to duke it out to the nines to say, hey, actually what Martin Luther was doing is the right way to do things. For, again, not its entirety of its existence, but toward the latter half of the Holy Roman Empire's lifespan as a political, cultural, and economic institution, body, kingdom, whatever you want to call it, it was plunged into a conflict about what was and what could be the right and proper way to worship God. And they made it not just the problem of their citizens, but the problem of everyone else around them. Again, religion matters. Good Lord Almighty, is it hard to be like, yeah, you guys know what holiness is, because you can't even decide what holiness is for your own citizenry. And that becomes a big, again, probably the most important aspect of the Holy Roman Empire, especially as we get toward the latter half of its existence. Roman is another thing that this place wasn't. And not only do I get to say the Holy Roman Empire wasn't really Roman, at the time of the Holy Roman Empire's inception and founding, there is a massive, and I mean massive, vested political interest in being seen as the legitimate successors to Rome. I have talked about this so much, both in the work that we have done here at Desks and Dorks, in some of the games that we've made, and in just my conversations with other people in this space. But the medieval world longed for the stability of Rome in such a way that if you could trace some amount of legitimacy to yourself and your rule to the Romans of old, it does a great deal to increase your power, your authority, and your ability to navigate political tensions and issues in a region. There is a specific reason that Charlemagne, the founder of the Frankish Empire, upon whose legacy the Holy Roman Empire exists, there's a reason that he was willing to sort of kowtow to, but there was a reason that he was willing to try to coronate himself in a church with the Pope so that he could say, yes, I am a successor to Rome. As far as being a cultural offshoot of Rome, the best you could say is that the Holy Roman Empire had the base of like northern Italy, where there were some prominent city-states, city areas, urban centers. But let's be real here for a second. Even then, it's a really dubious claim at best. If we're going to go with anything, the Holy Roman Empire is a wonderful, wonderful blend of Germanic, Slavic, Frankish, and even some Saxon influence throughout the course of its history, as well as some of that northern Italian influence. It is not Roman in any of the ways that we would say matter in terms of founding a state. This is an attempt by the Holy Roman Empire to gain legitimacy, authority, and power in the eyes of its people and in the eyes of the international entities that surround them. Again, I cannot stress this enough. There is a vested interest in a group of people calling themselves Roman because it lends to the authority that you can wield in a region. They want that authority. It's an important thing for them. It does not mean that they're Roman. And lastly, they're not a unified empire at all. At best, the Holy Roman Empire, quote unquote, sometimes gets along well enough to fight against the Muslims and European invaders who want to, exercise control over some of their territories, annex some of their space. Seriously, look at this map. These are different areas within parts of what would be the Holy Roman Empire or near the Holy Roman Empire. Seriously, these were controlled by disparate political entities that had vastly different goals sometimes, and although they did share some cultural similarities, things like language or religion, things like important customs, the way that you honored your neighbor or your family, a lot of times that wasn't good enough to lead to actual honest-to-God unity. They are more than willing to go to absolute slobber knocker, knock down, drag out, 12 rounds with Mike Tyson, bite your ear off and call you Sally kind of warfare with each other as they are to do that kind of warfare with the people that aren't technically part of the Holy Roman Empire. I cannot stress enough the level of disunity that these people would have to contend with all of the time. There is a reason that if you read German history, for example, you really think of the influence of someone like Bismarck, who would later on unite the very disparate and different, at the time, Germanic cultures under one place. That didn't really happen during the Holy Roman Empire. Some of the rulers tried, Otto the Great, but few of them succeeded for any length of time that was long, shall we say. So This place is not really all that holy, or at least it can't decide on what holiness means. It's not particularly Roman, because it's really just laying claim to the idea of being Roman for authority and power, and it for sure is not an empire, because it is as like to fight each other as they are to fight anybody else. All of these things make the Holy Roman Empire a glorious anomaly, a self-contradicting and absolutely confusing cluster of an international entity, and it just kind of makes me love it even more. I'll be completely honest, this is the medieval train wreck of nation states, and I cannot help myself from looking away. If we could just compare this to one thing, it's like the Real Housewives of Brandenburg. Literally, it's just a hot mess, and none of it makes sense, and it's all held together with a bunch of petty local alliances nobody can seem to remember, and if they can, it just ticks them off even more. God, I love the Holy Roman Empire so much. But it's not enough for me to love the Holy Roman Empire. You need to love the Holy Roman Empire, especially if you're going to include it in your games, and that brings us to the question of why. Why does this setting, why does this society work as a game setting? Well, let's start with the first one, the obvious one, and that's combat. We have talked about warfare constantly, whether it is the interscene political conflict that drives all of this, whether it is the existence of or the role the Holy Roman Empire plays in the Crusades or in driving back Muslim invaders or in waging their own invasions into the Holy Land and to the Levant. Combat is a constant consideration if you're a member of the Holy Roman Empire or one of its constituent states. This means that there is no shortage of conflict, battle, warfare, and violence that your players can get into. If you are looking to be bored, you do not want to set your campaign in the Holy Roman Empire. You will be up to your knees in battle before you can blink, and it's what makes it such a compelling setting. You will fight against everything from bandits to mercenaries to imperial knights to peasants desperate and running from starvation or from essentially religious forces looking to take care of them because they have the wrong belief system. There is conflict and combat in spades in the Holy Roman Empire, and it shows. Another reason that this is one of the best settings that you could have is the rapid development of technology. Because of the nexus point that the Holy Roman Empire occupies throughout its history, you get the best of medieval warfare if you're trying to make your game an exciting combat focused or even just an exciting innovation focused experience. You have the gallantry of the knights of the Holy Roman Empire, right? You've got sword, shield, plate, and mail. But then, of course, as history develops, you've got pike and shot warfare. I know this is, by the way, a depiction of the Swedish military. We'll talk about them in a second. But you've got pike and shot warfare as well. You've got the early development of firearms, and even as we get into the Napoleonic era, parts of the Holy Roman Empire wind up doing muskets, bayonets, and all of that jazz as they eventually become, Prussia, right? And they start fighting against Napoleon. It's incredible. Regions that would have been part of the Holy Roman Empire are again subsumed or changed and become a part of one of the greatest land-based conflicts in human history. It's absolutely amazing. And if you're setting your campaign in the Holy Roman Empire, you've got access to all of this different technological and military development, and that makes for a dynamic and intriguing campaign. But it's not just the fighting in the Holy Roman Empire and the area around it that makes it intriguing. No, it's the involvement and the instability of those institutions around it and the constant change that sparks that also makes it really interesting. At different points during the Holy Roman Empire's existence, places like Sweden and France, places like, medieval England, all helped to work over influence on the region. They wanted to exploit its places and its leaders for financial and political gain. This meant that work as a mercenary, a sellsword, was constant, and it also meant that depending on the background that you want to play, you've got plenty of opportunity and reason to go after the people of the Holy Roman Empire. And again, if you want to play as a sellsword, trying to carve out, in some cases literally, a name for themselves, this is the way to do it. And again, what's really awesome is it's entirely plausible and possible for an individual of great skill to carve out their own little empire in the Holy Roman Empire. There were mercenary captains who did just this, rising through military action and conquest, and sometimes just being an overall gigantic jerk to create, land for themselves, a state for themselves, and rise through the ranks in ways that no one or no other place would allow them. If you want your players to get the opportunity to carve out their own tiny kingdom, this is a great place for you to do it. And finally, one of my favorite things, and in fact probably my favorite aspect about the Holy Roman Empire, is the combination of witches, folk magic, and aggressive Christianity. Here's the thing. Because political institutions were constantly thrust into turmoil by conflict over and over, because the average citizenry was in constant conflict, not just with each other, but with those very same leaders, regardless of the religious affiliation, and because this led to a breakdown of communication, infrastructure, and bureaucracy that made it hard to not just keep records, but to communicate with one kingdom to another, you had an incredible rise of religious practices. I have talked about this before, but when there is religious conflict, political and bureaucratic upheaval, and a chance for things to exist on the fringes, you're going to get some weird folk religious practices. You're going to get some weird folk magic. And the Holy Roman Empire was super common with this. Yes, there was a massive Catholic presence. Yes, there was a massive Protestant presence. However, one of the most intriguing things about the Holy Roman Empire was at the very beginning, a rise of common magic. You had a class of individual people who were essentially treasure hunters that used treasure-based magic and charms to go looking. It was actually seen as a kind of responsible or beneficial trade or task to take because there was a chance for profit. And again, despite its quote-unquote holy reputation, these charms were often not prosecuted against, or laws that were formed against them were never truly enforced because they were so common and so widely accepted. The Holy Roman Empire is also, in addition to being a hotbed for folk magic and folk religious practices, was a hotbed for witch trials throughout the Middle Ages. All of this makes for one of the most incredible, evocative, and intriguing tapestries of religious and folk religious practices, folk magic abilities, and religious hierarchical institutions that you can have. I mean, there is so much magical and religious intrigue in this place, more than you can shake a mace at. And finally, my friends, with all of that out of the way, talking about this unholy, also kind of holy train wreck that is the HRE, we get to talk about how we use it in our games. And the first thing we need to do, though, before we talk about unique rules or strange ways that we can play around with this, is we have to talk about the fact that there are actually two fantastic games that already exist within what feels like a historically inspired world. The first one, of course, is Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing, which takes place, as we have talked about many times before already in this video, in a sort of fantastic version of the Holy Roman Empire, to the point that it's actually really difficult to separate some of the HRE's DNA from Warhammer Fantasies. The other one that draws very heavy inspiration from this is, of course, Veihander, which is another fantastic RPG, but both of these, if you're looking for an RPG that fits the mold of the HRE, are great places for you to start. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about how we would use it, and one of the ways that I think you should do this is the upheaval meter. Now, the Holy Roman Empire, as we have touched on, is a time of massive political warfare all over the place. And so, as a result, I think it's really important for you to simulate the rising tensions and shifting alliances of such a region with the upheaval meter. Here, by the way, is a lovely little abstraction, a map of the Holy Roman Empire, and here is the way the upheaval meter works. So for every action the players take, it either raises or lowers the tension in a surrounding region as tracked by a d6. I think this would be cool. You could put little d6s on the map, or you can have players shift them, make it a player's job. It would be kind of neat. But players get greater benefit or greater reward for venturing into areas where there's a lot of tension, because as we've established throughout medieval history, the more you move into a place with greater tension, the greater chance of reward, but also the greater chance of violence and getting unalived. So imagine, for example, that your campaign map starts like this, as tracked by those d6. The players, over the course of their campaign, perform something in that nice little dark green region right there, but as a result, it shifts the values and tensions of the things that are going on around them, and again, makes it harder for them to go into other places, or potentially more desirable, even if it does make those places more dangerous. I really like this because it kind of echoes the sort of geopolitical maneuvering and intrigue that was common during the Holy Roman Empire. I think that's kind of important. I think that's kind of neat. Now, with that out of the way, I think it's important for us to talk about what some of those prizes are. And yes, I'm aware I didn't set the 3 or the 6. I kind of just wanted to give you a rough idea of what you could expect. But like a 1 means that you're just probably going to get enough to get by, enough to scrape through another day, the food that you need to survive, right? But on a 2, maybe you get more coin. On a 4, weapons. On a 5, an estate, a place of your own. On a 6, who knows? Perhaps this is a way for you, the player, or you, the game master, to give your players a chance to become nobles, rulers, or political figures of great import in their own right. Now, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't add some sort of feature about folk magic, witchcraft, and just strange incantations. Now, if you've been a fan of Desks and Dorks for some time, and as we've talked about before, I think the best way to add believable folk magic into your games is charms. And you might be thinking there's no way Kyle does this again, but the answer to that question is yes, Kyle's doing it again. If you're going to make folk charms, they need to be weird, strange, bizarre. They should not be things like a +1 bonus or a reroll. If you do this, ho-hum, boring garbage, I will come to your house, live in your walls, and drink your orange juice. Don't do this. Make them weird. Make them hyper-specific as well. Make them things that are going to change how your players interact with a very, very specific, detail-focused aspect of your world. This is mission critical into making this feel like a unique piece of folk magic as opposed to just some random item that you got from rolling on a D% table. And finally, they need to be baroque, unique, bizarre. I know we already mentioned weird, but just they need to be strange. There's a certain je ne sais quoi about magic folk charms that if you get it just right, it makes your players appreciate your game so much more than any other thing you could potentially do. And you might be asking yourself, Kyle, what do some of those weird charms look like? Oh, I'm so excited for you to ask. You have the ability to make chains whisper to people. Pie makes you immune to fear-based effects, but other pastries increase their impact on you. Fireflies will once per week point you to a secret. Or, inspired by a member of our Discord, New Poly Dad, nails pull faster. Apparently, by the way, if you're a blacksmith, you'll know that pulling nails is an incredibly long and time-consuming task. I didn't realize how bad that was, and then I did some research into blacksmithing, and holy crap, pulling nails takes a long, long time. If you have this charm, though, less time. Once per day, you can throw a single potato and it bursts into flames. You may be wondering, Kyle, did you attempt to gamify the game of hot potato into a Holy Roman Empire low fantasy dark RPG? And the answer to that question, my dear friends, is yes, because I am an agent of chaos and I refuse to be humbled by God or man. And with that out of the way, my friends, it does bring us to the end of this video and the end of our time on the Holy Roman Empire. If you like what we do, if you feel like giving some love to this hot potato throwing individual's way, Patreon gets you some unique games or your name in the credits. You can, of course, get digital RPGs over at itch.io. If you want any of our games, I would really appreciate it if you did. But, of course, you can get physical copies from our distributors, Tabletop Bookshelf, Indie Press Revolution, and Exalted Funeral. But before we leave, I have to thank the amazing patrons who helped make this possible. A huge thank you to Dionysus, to Chris Bates, Agile Monk, Aiden Delaney, Brian, Gorbino the Great, Stefan Brousseau, Solution, Alex.vksh, and Papa Dinosaur. Y'all, you're amazing. Thank you for giving me an excuse to talk about flaming death potatoes in the Holy Roman Empire. There's a sentence that has never been said by a mortal man before. And with that, my dear friends, it brings us to the end of the video. I'm Kyle for Desks and Dorks. You have all been absolutely amazing. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.